Today on the Big 3 and 30, the Steelers put the UFA tag on Aaron Rodgers.
This, to me, is much different than all the other Aaron Rodgers.
The Panthers give Bryce Young his fifth-year option.
We've known this was going to happen since January.
And could the Jets bring in Russell Wilson?
Russell Wilson apparently worked out with the Jets yesterday. He had a visit to the team facility.
This is the Big 3 and 30 NFL, the three biggest stories in the NFL from our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 30 minutes. The Big 3 and 30 NFL starts now. Thank you for making the Big 3 and 30 your first listen of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com and win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. The Steelers placed the UFA tender on Aaron Rodgers while they wait on his decision for next season. Christopher Carter with Locked On Steelers gets into it.
We got some Aaron Rodgers news, and this to me is much different than all the other Aaron Rodgers news, because to me, this is a bit more of a warning shot from the Steelers, or at least a shot from them to protect themselves if something does not go the way that they expect. Now, what happened here? The Steelers signed or put a UFA claim on Aaron Rodgers, the UFA tender. And what that means is, and I had to look this up because I did not know what a UFA was. It's something that's used very rarely in the NFL. But it means that now the Steelers will receive exclusive negotiating rights for Rodgers if he does not sign by July 22nd or the first day of training camp, whichever comes later. If Rodgers signs with a new club before that date, it would allow him to count towards their compensatory pick formula in that situation. So essentially, what has happened here is the Steelers have placed this tender on him to say, hey, if he doesn't show up, we're going to get something for it. Like if he goes somewhere else, we're getting so. Now if he retires, right. That's it. But if he does sign somewhere else, they will get a comp pick for it. And if it gets past training camp, he can't just go sign somewhere else during the middle of the season. He's going to have to play for the Steelers if he wants to play at all. And Nick, to me, that doesn't sound like a confident team that's just that is expecting him to roll in whenever they want. This is not what Omar Khan said at the Combine. Oh, this isn't going to be like last time. He's right. This looks worse.
Well, I guess the other thing is maybe they would have done this last year, but they couldn't because he wasn't a UFA from them. So you can only do this from UFA. So it's possible they might have done it last year. We don't really know. But yeah, I will say this is kind of like taking an insurance policy out on your car. You have insurance in case you crash it. Kabali actually used this, and I think it's not a terrible idea, where you kind of have that insurance just in case. You don't expect it, but fine, you have something. And the Steelers are like here, I don't even know where Aaron Rodgers would sign. Arizona is the only one that comes to mind as a potential spot because of the Jacoby Brissett deal right now, where he wants a pay raise. If that thing just goes totally off the rails and they're like, we need a vet, it won't be Jacoby anymore, I guess that's the one spot. That's the only spot I could see him really working right now.
Right.
So I guess that. But, I mean, why would you rather go play in Arizona than Pittsburgh? I don't know. But that's all coming in. So it's like an insurance policy. The other thing that you didn't mention is if he does not sign with the Steelers by week 10, he can't play. Like the whole year, he cannot play. So that would be something. It's like the franchise tag where there's a deadline for someone to sign the tender. The Steelers can also totally rip this up whenever they want to. If Aaron comes to them, says, all right, I'm signing before mandatory minicamp, they can create a new contract. They're not burdened to the $15 million-ish tag that this is. Gives them a rough outline, though. And so it's just kind of, it's giving them an insurance policy, and it gives them some control over a situation that they previously did not have control over. And I think that's important. There was this semblance that they were getting walked to the cliff, Chris. And I think at some point you got to fight back a little bit, or at least give yourself some control over this situation. And I think now, at the very least, they have a little bit of consideration for that. So they have control. And if the worst case scenario does happen, which is Aaron Rodgers plays and goes somewhere else, now they're going to get a fourth round compensatory pick probably. So that's the important thing here.
I think that is an important thing to calculate here, is that the Steelers, I think this goes against the stance of confidence, because last year when we didn't know what the situation was, I very much got the sense, and I said it on the show several times, everyone that I was talking to, that there was a quiet confidence, a behind the scenes handshaking deal where the Steelers were just like, hey, show up for mandatory minicamp and all will be fine.
It
And he
wasn't
did
just
that.
a quiet confidence, Chris. It was a bravado every time we talked to Mike T. That was just echoing throughout. Now, maybe McCarthy just isn't Mike T is this charismatic guy that just is like able to do that. Now, maybe McCarthy just isn't giving those same signals off, and that's potentially he's just not the same type of public speaker.
I feel you on that. And I think that could be part of it is, as much as this is handshakes and, not signing the dotted line, the bottom line is you gotta get guys to sign, because if they're not signed, they can do whatever they want. They can lie to your face. They can go behind your back. They can do whatever they want. And that can be the thing that bites you in the butt. And if you're the Steelers, I think, with Mike Tomlin, like you said, like Mike Tomlin, you're right. He was the one that set the tone. It's like, guys, we're not worried about it. Aaron Rodgers is going to be here when he's going to be here. And that was that. And then when he showed up, it was great. And it was great for him. And it was great for them. And everything worked. And Aaron Rodgers sung praises. And he was very happy. But we've seen Aaron Rodgers take to the Pat McAfee show and, kind of make a quick, statement about, well, it takes two to tango, or, they got to get offered something. And then Omar Khan be like, well, we have offered something. And, we've just seen this stalemate right now of no one's budging. Everyone's waiting around. And it makes me wonder, could Mike Tomlin's presence have been a key factor in getting Aaron Rodgers to sign last year? And now that he's gone, even though Mike McCarthy is, won a Super Bowl with Aaron Rodgers, is there an issue there that Aaron Rodgers is like, you know what, I'm okay right now. And maybe not. Maybe he shows up, mandatory minicamp, training camp, whatever it is, and everything's fine, and this is not. But this move to me shows that there is a lack of confidence that it's actually going to happen somewhere in the organization, whether that's Art Rooney, Omar Khan, or everyone.
I mean, I think that's fair. That there had been this kind of underlying theory from some people that Aaron had told them he's going to play, and they just aren't saying it publicly. I think this shows that is not what is happening. Yeah. I think that is for sure. They do not have an answer from Aaron Rodgers. And listen, Aaron Rodgers, again, as I said, could easily come to them in late May, just like he did last year, and say, I'm signing right before mandatory minicamp. I think that is the natural spot he would sign. And I know he rationalized this another way, but I think you're kind of crazy to not think they put minicamp in the middle of OTAs to not try to incentivize a little bit more participation from Aaron Rodgers, maybe in the offseason program. Aaron Rodgers has been a guy that has very outspokenly said that the spring offseason program should not exist. There should be no OTAs. There should be no mandatory minicamp. It should be, the season ends and we show up at training camp. That's what he wants to happen. So, I guess, honestly, Chris, we don't know exactly the day minicamp's going to training camp's going to happen yet. I guess that's probably the final line, right? If he doesn't show up by training camp, I think it's fair to say you probably don't think he's going to show up much at all, if any. And so we'll see. But this absolutely does signal that he has not told them he is playing. And there's at least, even if it's a 5% doubt and they're 95% sure, there's really no downside to placing this tag on him. And they did tell him ahead of time too, so he's not blindsided by it. So there's that too. At least there's those open lines of communication. So we'll see. I think he might still be mulling it, right? He's 43 years, he's gonna be 43, man. He has a lot of love for football, but at some point you gotta call it a career. So he's probably still weighing some options in that case.
Workplace chaos, deadlines stacking up, inbox overflowing, and the one position you have to fill still sitting open. When the pressure's on and you need the right hire, this is a job for sponsored jobs. Indeed, sponsored jobs help you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for. Skills, experience, location. So you're not just hoping the right candidate stumbles across your post. And here's a stat that says it all. In the minute I've been talking to you, companies like yours made 27 hires on Indeed. That's according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all the boxes with Indeed sponsored jobs. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all of your boxes. Less stress, less time, more results. When you need the right person to cut through the chaos, this is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves. It's over at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support your show by saying you heard about Indeed right here. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? This is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. Welcome back to the Big 3 and 30 NFL. The Panthers picked up Bryce Young's fifth-year option to keep him under contract through 2027. Julian Council with Locked On Panthers lays out what that means for the future in Carolina.
It doesn't really feel like big news because we've known this was going to happen since January, 3 days after the season, when Dan Morgan, the Panthers general manager and president of football operations, told the media without anyone asking that they were going to exercise the fifth-year option on Bryce Young's rookie contract that will have him paid $25.9 million in 2027, have him as Panthers starting quarterback for the next 2 seasons. So that was great to hear. The only thing was they just took a long time to finally go out there and do it. The deadline was on Friday. The Panthers, of course, they met the deadline by doing it on Wednesday today on April 29th, and they could have done it at any point leading up to the last couple of months and days. They decided that they had other things to focus on, like the draft. You go back to January when Dan said that. He then waited until, of course, today, but he was on the Up and Adams show by Kay Adams on FanDuel, and he was saying back then, quote, yeah, we picked up the fifth-year option on Bryce. Bryce is definitely our future, and that hadn't officially happened. Then he was asked during his press conference right before the draft when they were going to do that. He said they were going to do it after the draft, which, of course, has now happened. And the big reason why they hadn't done it was because Bryce hadn't been in the building as the Panthers offseason program began last Monday on April 20th. So here we are. It's finally happened. Bryce Young is your starting quarterback, not just in 2026, but financially also in 2027. And now the countdown to when he'll get extended begins for the Panthers and for everyone involved in wondering whether that will be the case. And looking at Carolina, we've known this about this organization across its 30 plus years of existence. They've done a great job when it comes to drafting in the first round. You look at all their draft picks since 2017. That's Christian McCaffrey, DJ Moore, Brian Burns, Derek Brown, JC Horn, Ike Ekwonu. Every single one of them have had their fifth-year options exercised by the Panthers. Now, of course, Christian, DJ, and Brian are no longer here. Derek, of course, is here. JC is here, and Ike is here for now. We'll see how that plays out with his knee injury in just the current situation with Monroe Freeling being drafted, Rasheed Walker here, and I suppose Stone Forsythe, but really Taylor Moton and what his future is going to be here at Carolina as the right tackle. So they've done a great job in bringing in guys in the first round who have actually panned out and then rewarding them when the time came. The only bad thing there was for a couple seasons, they weren't willing to keep those guys around. Christian, it made sense. You don't need to pay a running back that much money when you were one of the worst teams in the NFL. And of course, they turned around later on that season and just missed out on winning the division. And DJ, well, that never really made any sense because if you want to draft the quarterback number 1 overall, you probably shouldn't get rid of his best wide receiver after you already traded away his best running back, who also could have been one of his best receivers out of the backfield to get the compensation in order to move up to go get him there number 1 overall like Carolina did back on March 10th of 2023. And then Brian Burns, yeah, they just waited too long. And that was just not a situation that was tenable for either party at the point in time when they traded him to the Giants, where I guess it's worked out for both. Certainly for Brian, he's not winning any games. Carolina, they're winning more now without Brian Burns than they were with Brian Burns. But we've already discussed that. Not a big deal at all. But it makes sense that Carolina is doing this right now, considering that Bryce is coming off of his career season where he threw for over 3,000 yards, had 23 touchdowns, had a 63.6 completion percentage, pass rating of 87.8. Now, if you look at things like success rate, and you look at just his other stats as far as I can't even think about what's the other one I'm trying to think of. They haven't been great. He's still been among the lowest graded in the NFL in terms of success rate, in terms of EPA. There we go. That's the other one I was trying to think of. So that's something you'd like to see get better moving forward. But considering how things began for Bryce back during that disastrous rookie season in 2023, when Frank Reich was fired 11 games into it, and Reich and Thomas Brown flip-flop play calling duties. There were far too many cooks in the kitchen, and Bryce clearly did not look like a guy who was ready to play. There was that weird injury in week 3 where he didn't play. Andy Dalton set the world on fire in that loss against the Seahawks there in week 3, and then he did the next year in week 3 after Bryce was benched 2 weeks into the season, 2 weeks into Rob Hunt and Damian Lewis being here, 2 weeks into having Dave Canales as the quarterback whisperer in your head coach. He pulled the plug at that time, and it took until Andy went and got into a car accident and hurt his thumb for the Panthers to put Bryce out there, and Bryce was fine against Denver, was certainly good against New Orleans, was good against the Giants, and Dave said after that game in Munich that, okay, Bryce is showing us something. He is earning the respect of a lot of people in that locker room, which he had to do, and guys are crashing out in week 1 based off of how Bryce was playing against the Saints back in 2024. Adam Thielen was freaking out there in week 2, and we knew that Deontay Johnson was a ticking time bomb. You had to figure out that situation, and obviously, since Bryce was reinserted into the starting lineup as starting quarterback, things have been a lot better, but you still look at it, there's still been the games like against the Seahawks back in December, 54 yards passing. That's disgusting. That can't happen at the NFL level for your supposed franchise quarterback. But you have the moments like against the Rams now while he played in both of those games. The 12 game-winning drives since he's entered the league back in 2023, the most in the league. And that's the crazy thing. When the Panthers win games, it's typically because Bryce is leading them down the field. Now, there's times like the game against Green Bay, Bryce made a great play by being able to confuse the defense and think that they're going to pass. Instead, they handed off to Rico, and Rico said that was all Bryce, and that picked up necessary yardage for them to get in field goal range to win that game at Lambeau Field that afternoon. Also, credit to Tracy Smith, the special teams coordinator, for knowing the wind and knowing the way they wanted to go at the end of that game if they were in the position to kick a field goal, which of course they were, and they made it because of that. But Bryce, he's had his moments, both good and bad, and just and you need a lot more good and than bad, which that still happened last year. So what I really want to see from him moving forward is that consistency. Again, 2023, FUBAR, horrible. You don't want to look at that and think that's ever going to happen with Bryce as your quarterback again in his career. 2024 off to a hellacious start, but then second half of the season, things started to look good. Didn't really start off that great this past year. At least he didn't get benched, and then it leveled off. You have the ups and downs of the win-loss for the team in itself, but down the stretch in all those games when they needed Bryce, I felt like he stepped up to the plate. He had that interception against Tampa, and that would have won it for the Panthers as far as divisional round game, but they didn't win. I didn't think he was the problem at all in that game. I look at the coach. I look at this team overall and not having the maturity to win in those situations. The Seahawks game wasn't great, but he did step up in the other aspects of their run and was great in that win. Or not great, but he was good enough to win in that game against the Rams back in January. So considering where it began and where you are now, every Panthers fan should be celebrating the fact that it looks like the Panthers have hit on the quarterback to the point where we're considering a second contract for him. They're considering. I have nothing to do with that. They're considering a second contract for Bryce Young. Now, he'll be paid $25.9 million in 2027, according to overthecap.com. He's getting paid $5.9 this year, so that's $31.8 million across the next 2 seasons, $15.9 when looking at the average annual value. That would rank 18th in the NFL, according to all the quarterbacks out there. So there are 10 quarterbacks, by the way, who are making $50 million, just to put this into context, and that's their average annual value, while there's 4 others making 40 mil. And the Panthers going to be paying Bryce Young average $15.9 mil the next 2 seasons, when there's other guys who are getting paid 50 and 40. And if things work out, that's what you're going to have to pay him eventually. The big thing for me, though, moving forward is the Panthers need to be fully invested in Bryce over the next 2 seasons. I think they clearly have done that this offseason. We'll talk about that later on in the show, how much they have done to help Bryce as far as the coaching staff and the personnel around him offensively this upcoming season. But it can't just be this year. It also has to be next year. And that does not matter how things play out this year. I understand if he takes a step back, that's significant, and he looks unplayable at times, you have to question whether you can actually have him be your guy. But I don't think you're exercising fifth-year option on a guy that you're worried about taking a step back this upcoming season. You want to see that consistency. You want to see more of what you saw in the second half of 2024 and what you saw in the bulk of the past season, but you want it to be a week-to-week thing. You don't want to see any more of the 54-yard passing games. That was the offense overall failure, and the Seahawks obviously ended up being Super Bowl champs. That just cannot happen at the NFL level. We all understand that. You want to see that week to week. You want to see just a normalcy, no drama surrounding him and that position. And the drama was not any of his making. It was the making of just the people around him and the organization up top, as in the owner, the coaches, and of course the fans, and how y'all get when things don't look perfect with Bryce and the Dolphins game and the 2 interceptions and the fumble and all that. And everyone's like, oh, bust, got to get this guy out of here. I'm out on Bryce. And what does he do? Helps you come back and win that game and has one of his 12 game-winning drives. So you just got to take a deep breath. And I hope the organization is able to do that, unlike the way they did with Sam Darnold. And I was never a fan of Sam Darnold coming to Carolina. And once they traded 3 picks for him, I felt like, okay, you got to exercise fifth-year option. I know people look back on it and say it was a mistake. I didn't think it was a mistake, because why invest that much and then only sign up for 1 season guaranteed? They weren't dedicated to Sam being their quarterback for those 2 seasons, as was demonstrated by going after Deshaun Watson, ending up with Baker Mayfield and trying to upgrade or at least bring in competition at that point in time. And never mind, the situation around Sam back in 2021 was a mess. He got injured. CMC was injured throughout the entirety of the season. The offensive line was terrible. Oh, yeah, and he was coached by Matt Rule. They didn't stand by their guy. They're doing it this time. And I love that, Dan, the messaging surrounding Bryce has been perfect. He let us know back in January, we're exercising fifth-year option on Bryce Young. And at every point in time throughout the offseason, he let it be known that Bryce is their guy, that they're going to do this, that they believe in Bryce Young and want him to be their franchise quarterback. And now they've officially given him the money for the next 2 seasons to be that guy.
Welcome back to the Big 3 and 30 NFL. The Jets are considering Russell Wilson as a possible QB2 behind Geno Smith. John Butchko with Locked On Jets sorts through the quarterback room in New York.
Let's start by talking about the veteran. Russell Wilson apparently worked out with the Jets yesterday. He had a visit to the team facility. The Jets seem like they're looking for a veteran backup. If you go back to the beginning of the offseason, there was a lot of talk about how the team planned to bring in 2 veteran quarterbacks. Geno Smith was the first. There were rumors that the team wanted to bring Carson Wentz in as the backup, but that did not really pan out. So we got to the draft, and we're still waiting on that second veteran quarterback. Well, perhaps it will be Russell Wilson. And based on some of the reporting, it sounds like this might be a favor to Geno Smith or something along those lines. There are some suggestions that the team approached Geno about options they had for veteran quarterbacks to back him up, and Smith and Wilson played together in Seattle. Geno was actually Russell Wilson's backup for a number of years with the Seattle Seahawks. It's not clear whether the Jets are going to sign Russell Wilson, though. And the news yesterday got probably more of a reaction than it should have. The Jets are just bringing in Russell Wilson for a visit. Jets bring in plenty of players to visit the team facility who they do not eventually sign. So it's not a guarantee the Jets are going to sign Russell Wilson to be their backup quarterback. Now, of course, Russ is a big name. If you go back 6-7 years during his time with the Seattle Seahawks when Geno was backing him up, Wilson was one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. And ever since then, it's been a decline. He got traded to Denver and did not match the level of play he showed in Seattle. Then he went to Pittsburgh for a year. There were some good moments, but that ultimately was a failure. Then last year with the Giants, only started a couple of games before he lost the lead role to Jackson Dart. So Russell Wilson right now is in the stage of his career where if he wants to stick in the league, he's going to have to be a backup, and it's going to have to be for something close to the league minimum. Now, would Russell Wilson be a good signing at the league minimum to back up Geno Smith? The answer is no. I don't think Russell Wilson really has much left in the tank. Russell Wilson, in his prime, was a truly elite quarterback. But What made him elite was his mobility, because he could break away from pressure. Some of his best plays were running away from defensive linemen and then throwing the ball down the field and hitting big plays. He was also a dangerous threat as a runner. Those days are long gone. And I think you could draw a direct line from Russell Wilson's mobility starting to decline with Russell Wilson's play starting to decline. Wilson is undersized for the quarterback position. So I think one of the things he needed was that mobility to kind of roll left, roll right, because he kind of has trouble seeing over the offensive line because he's short for a quarterback. And now that that mobility is gone, he just really can't bring much to the table. Would I be fired up either way if the Jets sign Russell Wilson or don't sign Russell Wilson? The answer is no. And the reason the answer is no is because if you're asking me to get excited or to get angry that the Jets are signing Russell Wilson to be the backup for the league minimum, then you're asking me to care whether Bailey Zappi gets on the 53-man roster or gets cut, because Zappi's the guy who would go. Geno Smith's the starting quarterback. The Jets just drafted Cade Klubnik over the weekend to be their developmental quarterback as a rookie. So Zappi's the guy who would be in danger. I would understand it if the Jets signed Wilson, because I think there's logic to having two veterans. It prevents the team from feeling pressure to put Zappi on the field too soon. If Geno gets injured or if Geno plays himself out of the lineup, then the next guy to go in would be the veteran. It would not prevent the Jets from putting Klubnik on the field near the end of the season if they were out of the playoff race, but I don't think he'd really help. So I can't get fired up either way for Russell Wilson. There's another quarterback who there's a lot of discussion about, though, this week, Brandon Sorsby, who played most of his college career at Cincinnati and was a big addition in the transfer portal this year at Texas Tech, but he's apparently under NCAA investigation, something to do with gambling. So there's now speculation that Sorsby potentially could enter the supplemental draft. Now, I know a lot of you listeners know what the supplemental draft is, but I'm just going to explain it because some of you may not know. And it's not something that's highly publicized, but there's actually a second NFL draft every year. It takes place after the main event, which we just saw this weekend. It's called the supplemental draft. And it's for players who want to turn pro, but did not file in time to be eligible for the regular draft. So guys who, for whatever reason, decide after the deadline, you know what, I got to go pro. And there's speculation Sorsby may enter the supplemental draft. We don't have anything firm on that, but there's discussion because he's apparently under investigation by the NCAA that he may look to enter the supplemental draft. Now, the supplemental draft works a little bit differently from the regular draft. It's not a spectacle that's televised. It's not the first pick goes and then the second pick goes, then the third pick goes. Essentially, it's a silent auction. Usually, there's maybe one or two players a year who are in the supplemental draft, and every team has the option to either bid on a player or not bid on a player. And if you bid on a player, you essentially determine what round pick you want to use on him. So one team may put, I want to use a third round pick on this guy. Another team may put, I want to use a second round pick on this guy. And he goes to whichever team bids highest. And if there's a situation where the high bid is two teams both putting in a third round pick, it's whatever team had the higher draft pick in the regular draft who gets him. Essentially, that's the high bid. The catch is you lose the pick for the round you bid in if you get the player for the next year's NFL draft. So if there's a player who's available in the 2026 NFL draft and you get him using your third round pick, you lose your third round pick in the 2027 NFL draft. So get a player in the supplemental draft, you lose the pick for that round in the next year's regular NFL draft. That's how it works. So there's discussion about Sorsby potentially being in the supplemental draft, and that's naturally led to discussion among Jets fans and other fans across the NFL, whether he'd be worth potentially looking at in the supplemental draft. I think the answer to that would be no. I think the answer to that is no for a couple of reasons. First of all, we don't know where this investigation is going to lead. And the NFL in the past has not looked kindly upon players who entered the NFL draft, the supplemental draft, to evade punishment from the NCAA. This happened about 15 years ago. There was a quarterback at Ohio State, Terrell Pryor, who ran into some NCAA violations and was suspended by the NCAA. So he entered the supplemental draft, ended up getting picked by the Raiders. The NFL upheld the suspension. So I don't know what's going to happen with Sorsby, but if he enters the supplemental draft, it might be potentially because he's afraid he's going to lose his eligibility. It's not clear the NFL would allow him to play. But beyond that, we don't really know where this investigation is going to lead. And I think you have to look ahead. Now, we don't know how the quarterback class of 2027 is going to perform the next college season. But I think you have to look at this from this lens. Is Sorsby so head and shoulders above everybody else that you feel like you'd have to take him this year? Or would you feel better waiting to see how things go? You have 3 first-round picks next year. You'll have an opportunity potentially to take a guy at the top of that class. There's no guarantees, but I feel like that's a gamble I'd be willing to take because I don't think Sorsby would be the number 1 quarterback in next year's class anyway. You know, it all depends, of course, how things go in the season. Fernando Mendoza came from off the radar to be the number 1 pick this year and the Heisman Trophy winner, and he led Indiana to the national title. So guys can emerge. Things can change. But based on what we know now, I'd be more comfortable just letting the next season play out. Because again, you got the 3 first-round picks. You have your own pick, you have the Indianapolis pick, and you have whichever is the worst of the Dallas or Green Bay picks. So 3 first-round picks. I'm not ready to say that next year's class is going to be great because that's what we heard about this year's class. But I just don't think it really makes sense for the Jets to do that at this point in time. So essentially what you have are 2 quarterback options. Neither of them is very exciting. And I don't think either of them are really great fits for the Jets. If the Jets want to sign Russell Wilson, so be it. It's not going to hurt. It's not going to help, but it's not going to do damage to the team. I think Sorsby, we don't even know what's going to happen with him yet, but if he was to enter the supplemental draft, I think there's enough that would make me say, let's just wait till next year. Let's wait till 2027 where we have 3 first-round picks and you can roll the dice that there's going to be a prospect who falls to you who's good enough.
That's all for today's Big 3 in 30 NFL. If you follow basketball or college sports, the Big 3 in 30 has shows for the biggest news in the NBA and on campus going up every week just like this one. Just search the Big 3 in 30 NBA or the Big 3 in 30 college wherever you're listening or watching now. Thanks again for tuning in to the Big 3 in 30 NFL.